And welcome to the show, everybody. I'm Joe Concha, joined by, as always, my co-host Rick Unger, who just got off a 4-hour shift.
Man, all Rick all the time.
Co-hosting Steve Malzberg's show, and he did a great job. I was actually on with him. But you look still as spry as a ball boy at Wimbledon, which you were once.
Of course.
When Borg won his second championship.
You remember that? That's
I remember
right.
it. We're showing the video later.
Go ahead.
You know her.
Bring it out.
You love her. She's here every night and even on weekends when we don't have a show.
Right.
Heather Hansen joins us. And finally, a very special guest, everyone. He represents Pennsylvania's 3rd District and will be representing the Daily Wrap for the next hour. Congressman Mike Kelly is here.
Good to be with you, Joe.
Good to see you. Let's go to the Daily Download. And today, Iranians are celebrating the efforts of Javad Zarif for ending that country's economic sanctions after the U.S., many critics are saying, completely capitulated just to say they made a deal. Iranians, owners of a struggling economy, as you may have heard, feel this deal will give a real boost to their economy. Meanwhile, President Obama calling the preliminary agreement historic.
Today, the United States, together with our allies and partners, has reached a historic understanding with Iran, which, if fully implemented, will prevent it from obtaining a nuclear weapon.
And the Commander-in-Chief continues.
And it is a good deal, a deal that meets our core objectives. This framework would cut off every pathway that Iran could take to develop a nuclear weapon.
And while the Iranians in the White House celebrate, Israel now getting very nervous. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu saying today that any final nuclear deal with Iran must include a commitment from Tehran recognizing Israel's right to exist. In a statement, Netanyahu saying Israel demands that any final agreement with Iran will include a clear and unambiguous Iranian commitment of Israel's right to exist. Israel will not accept an agreement which allows a country that vows to annihilate us to develop nuclear weapons, period. Congressman, let's start with you. What do you think of this pending deal with Iran?
Well, I said earlier, I mean, there's no such thing in this administration as a red line or a deadline, because if it goes past that, then we just establish a new deadline or a new red line. If you're Israel, you can be very worried right now. And what I don't quite understand, Joe, we have 6 members of this panel. A third of which I don't think we have much credibility with Russia and China being on it, and knowing that all 6 have to be on. You look at what's happened so far, and you start to get into the details of the deal today, and you say, wait, this is not a deal. And then they talked about it as a framework. This doesn't make sense to me, that the strongest country in the free world is now bringing somebody to the table and giving them the same status and say, well, we need to work out a deal with you, and I think we can really get to that. We can work with each other. I think Congress actually plays a big role in this too. We're the ones that will decide whether to loosen or tighten sanctions. So there's a lot of confusion as to where we go with that, but it doesn't appear to me right now that it's a good deal. The president talked about a good deal, but the president's very good at wordsmithing, and he says things all the time that sound good, but sometimes feel really bad.
Secretary Kerry had said that if Congress meddles with this deal or kills it, that would be reckless on your part. Your thoughts, you're a congressman.
Well, of course, because it always comes down to everything's going to be okay if Congress doesn't screw it up. I don't know. I've been there now 4 years, going into my 5th year. I'm trying to understand where Congress's role of screwing things up has really come into play, because we haven't really had much to say, and we have a president who really believes that executive power trumps everything that comes out of Congress. So as far as Congress screwing it up, we are the people's house. We have the responsibility to look at this treaty, framework, whatever, and decide, is this in the best interest of the American people? Forget about Republicans or Democrats or independents or libertarians. Is this in the best interest of the American people? And if it's not, then we need to stand up and say, hey, time out. This doesn't make sense to us.
Heather, when you look at this deal, which aspect of it do you think can fall apart first, just to play the negative contrarian to anybody who supports the deal?
The thing that
where do you see it going wrong?
The inspections or lack thereof. I mean, you know, they have consistently, they being Iran, have consistently not stood up to inspections. You know, in 2003 they signed that they would agree to inspections. In 2005 that just fell apart. And we have there's no true snapback provision. It's more like a crawl back provision if they do fail inspections, to make sure that something happens to them so that we can get sanctions in place again, so that they can't, you know, we talk about avoiding a war. Isn't it better to have a war today than a war in 2 years by a country that's more financed and now has a nuclear weapon? There's some real serious considerations here, and thankfully, hopefully, Congress will be involved in considering those things.
Do you think, Rick, if for whatever reason the Iranians don't allow us to inspect to our satisfaction, the world's satisfaction, that we'll follow through with our threat to strip those sanctions, put those sanctions right back on?
It's complicated, and a lot of it again has to do with Congress. Now, it's always hard for me to debate Congressman Kelly over here because while I disagree with everything he has to say, he's one of my favorite people in Congress, and because he's a good congressman.
Don't let your personal feelings get in the way
it's hard.
of your convictions.
But I heard you say that it's the people's house, and I agree it's the people's house, but the people's house has to clean up its act a little bit. So, this is what concerns me. Already this morning, and I am no expert on Iran and on nuclear weapons deals. And I was the first to say this morning that I was deeply troubled that this 4-page agreement that the president is shopping around, or the State Department, isn't signed by anybody. Where I come from, it ain't a deal unless you sign it. So I'm with you on that. But I do really want to see Congress not just line up on their respective sides, as they're already doing this morning with Democrats supporting the president. Don't support the president if you think he's wrong. And Republicans killing the president. Well, don't criticize the president unless you really think he's wrong. And give it a chance. Look and see, where are the safeguards? Heather is right. If the verification cannot be followed through on, you're absolutely right, we got nothing. Right. But let's give this a chance to be analyzed by experts. That's all I ask.
Congressman.
And I agree with you, but here's the thing. Hardly any time in history can we look at somehow appeasing people or accommodating people.
I hear that.
Go back to Neville Chamberlain and coming back home and said, peace in our time. And Heather hit on something that's very, very important. Yeah, maybe peace today. I hardly think you look at what's gone on so far and say, you know what, I feel really good about this. If you feel really good about it, just go back and study history. Look at North Korea, where we have all kind of agreements.
No, that's fair.
These folks we're dealing with,
But remember who ruined
they
those agreements.
don't deal in honesty.
It was the neocons who really ruined what had gotten started with North Korea. So you have to keep that in mind historically, which makes it harder for me to trust them on this one.
And on that note,
Trust is trust.
Trust but verify.
There we
right?
go.
they're so chummy together. I have a feeling two people will be going out after this show. Anyway, coming up next, March job numbers are out and they ain't pretty. This is the Daily Wrap and it's only on Newsmax TV. And welcome back to the Daily Wrap. I'm Joe Concha along with Rick Unger, Heather Hansen, and special guest, Congressman Mike Kelly. Today, the Department of Labor releasing its monthly jobs report, and it ain't encouraging. Just 126,000 new jobs were added last month. The last time we had a jobs report that poor was in December of 2013. In a related story, the unemployment rate stayed at 5.5%. You would think that's pretty low, but it doesn't quite tell the whole story. First, the actual or real unemployment rate is 10.9%. Secondly, for the first time, the number of Americans out of the labor force has exceeded 93 million. That is people of working age, 16 years or older. Also, the number of people participating in the labor force has dropped to a 37-year low to just 62.7%. A lot of numbers there. So what does it mean? Well, frankly, a ton of people have decided to just simply stop looking for work. If you aren't actively looking for a job, the government does not include you in the unemployment report. So, Congressman Kelly, you're a businessman, owns some car dealerships. Yes. I may be in the market for one, so a deal, a little 0% financing.
You use the show to try and snore a deal out.
We'll get there.
Exactly.
We'll get there.
I knew it.
So what do you see? Like, I don't want Congressman Kelly to answer this question. I want businessman Kelly to answer the question on the ground. What's going on?
Yeah, let me talk to you. It's Mike Kelly from Butler, Pennsylvania, where Armco Steel we had 3,500 people working. We had Pullman railroad car builders. We had 3,400 people working there. We had so many people working. When I came out of high school, it was hard for somebody to say, I'm not going to work because there were so many jobs.
But that was you graduated back in 1994, so that was when the economy was coming back under Clinton.
You're very kind. Yeah. But here's really comes down to this. The business that I'm in depends on people having confidence that they're going to be able to make a payment for the next 36 months, for the next 48 months. And so when you take that away from them, it's uncertainty. And I think that right now, stagnant wages where people just aren't making enough money to keep up with inflation, where they can't make a decision to buy a house, to get married, to raise a family, these are things that are absolutely critical. This is the American dream that I grew up with. And I just think you look at this country right now with all the assets that we have. And if this is going to become the new norm, then we need to have new leadership, because there's no board of directors that would ever look at a company with the assets that this country has and say it's okay to underperform consistently year after year? It's okay not to perform up to your stockholders' expectations or the people that you make products for? It's just not okay. This is not okay. It's not America. It's certainly not our future. And that's where I think, my goodness, here in America right now, to be looking at these numbers, shame. It's shameful. We shouldn't be that way. It's actually stunning that we look back at this and think, well, that's as good as we can be. Far from it. Far from it.
Heather, I wonder if in 2016, whoever the Democratic nominee is, Hillary Clinton, will say, you know what, we should keep going down the road that we're going because look at the unemployment rate. It's only 5-point-something%. In other words, I don't hear a lot of politicians touting that number the way you think it would happen because I guess they know that Americans on the ground are saying, my wages are stagnant and I'm working 2 jobs. Right?
Or I've taken myself completely out of the labor force altogether, which is a big part of the problem as well. I think that on both sides, that this is going to be the issue. We talk about all this other stuff. People want better lives, and that's in some ways going to help Jeb Bush. When he was governor of Florida, they led the country in job creation. Now it was a different time, but still, I think that will help. It could hurt Scott Walker because Wisconsin is lagging right now in job creation. But I do think that this is going to be the issue, and for those governors who are running, it's going to really. What their states are doing is going to impact how they do.
Absolutely. And in the state of Ohio, for instance, if John Kasich decided to run, unemployment's down 45%.
Every night they campaign.
45% since he took office. That's pretty impressive. I think that's something that he will run on if he does run. Mr. Unger, I'm going to give you a little softball. I'm going to give you a little T-ball here.
Softballs, yeah.
Little T-ball, all right? People on your side of the aisle will say, well, people aren't looking for jobs anymore because they're retiring. The baby boomers are getting old, and that is affecting this whole number as far as people looking for work.
It's interesting because for a couple of years, I've been wondering what role that plays. And for the first time in the BLS report today, they actually mentioned it. Right. They actually, for the first time, said that is a factor. Now, I don't want to overstate it. I don't think that explains all of our problems because it doesn't. The number that I really look at is the participation number, and I don't say that to try and defend my side.
Can you
because
define the participation?
The number, the people who are working, because that number is also at like a low since
62 points
forever, right? But here's what I think is worth looking at. Aside from the fact that things are obviously tough, I wonder, for years, we've talked about technology, robots, all these crazy things would someday replace human jobs. Well, I think someday has arrived. And I think that's part of it. And I think we have to consider that. The other part we have to consider in that number is the older people who are retiring. Look, the baby boomer has arrived at that age, and we can't forget about it. Not to explain it away. It's a problem. I mean, what Mike said, I have to agree with. I mean, all these things are real. But these are factors that Americans should begin to consider.
The number that doesn't make sense to me is 2.8 million people voluntarily quit their jobs in January, and that's up 17% from last year.
That might be the retirement.
It could well be. It could well be. But it's a lot of people. The way that the article that I read on this was talking about people quitting to make more money, like just hopping job to job to make more money. Arguably, but I think that those statistics need to be better defined so that we know what it is that we're dealing with, so we can fix it. You talk about this is not our America, and we need to fix it. But how do you do that when these statistics are so undefined?
I want to get back to what Rick said earlier as far as machines replacing people. And the workers at McDonald's were complaining that the raise they got in their minimum wage wasn't enough, and they're still angry and they want more. And you know what? There's a side to me that thinks that the very top, those corner offices at McDonald's are saying, you know what? We don't need you.
Right.
I could very easily, just like I do at the airport now, I check in, I don't have to go to a person. Everything's on a kiosk. Yeah. I get my ticket and I go. And I can see that with food as well. I want a Big Mac, fries, shake, right? I swipe my card, and there it is. Somebody has to still take it and deliver it over there. Even a robot could probably do that at this point. And that's it. I just wonder if this is going to play a whole role into the whole minimum wage argument that, you know what, guys? You're expendable. No politician would say that, but I think that's where we're going.
But I think we go back to what America's always been. It's not about minimum wage. It's about maximum opportunity. It doesn't matter where you go to church. It doesn't matter what your last name is or where you grew up. It matters is how ready are you for a job that's today. You can forget about some of those manufacturing jobs. They're going to be gone forever. But one of the biggest challenges companies have in my area is replacing people of retirement age. There's no Greenpeace coming up. We don't have new workers coming up, skilled laborers that can actually step into those positions. So education is always the way out of poverty.
Yeah, that's what I was going to bring up. Is our educational system flawed? And we only have like 30 seconds, so we'll have to do some very broad strokes here. But I think the curriculum in college and high school is not focusing where it should, particularly IT jobs, because that's where everything's going, right? And that's if you're smart in that area, you could get a job a lot easier. But in high school, they're still taking home ec and gym. I think we got to switch some things. 10 seconds to answer that entire.
No, but you're right. But it's knowing what jobs are available and preparing for them, and then encouraging young people to go after those jobs.
Boom. We end it there. Coming up next, Sir Charles Barkley thinks Americans are homophobic. No, really. This is the Daily Wrap, only on Newsmax.